Totilio was born into a modest middle-class family in Ibadan, Nigeria, a household where wealth was not measured by possessions but by discipline, integrity, and an unshakable belief in education. And from a very young age, she learned that nothing in life would be handed to her freely. That success demanded sacrifice, patience, and relentless effort, values her parents repeated so often that they became stitched into her identity. While other children played without worry, Totilio studied with quiet determination, understanding that knowledge was her most powerful weapon against limitation. And by the time she entered the University of Ibadan, one of Nigeria's most respected academic institutions, she was already known among her peers as someone who never settled for mediocrity, choosing environmental science not because it was popular, but because she believed the land, the soil, and the future of farming in Nigeria deserved protection and innovation. And throughout her university years, she distinguished herself not only by her grades, but by her curiosity, discipline, and willingness to work harder than anyone else, spending long nights in laboratories, weekends researching sustainable farming practices, and months refining a thesis so original and practical that it later caught international attention. When she graduated with a first-class degree, her professors spoke of her as a rare mind, a woman whose ideas could change how Africa approached environmental conservation. And their praise was not exaggerated, because her final research paper was published in an international journal, something few Nigerian undergraduates ever achieved. And for Totilio, this achievement was not the end, but a beginning, the proof that her sacrifices had meaning. Soon after graduation, she set her sights on the Bodija International Fellowship, a prestigious and fiercely competitive program based in the United States that selected only 10 candidates from across the entire African continent each year, offering full funding, global exposure, and guaranteed placement in elite research institutions. An opportunity so powerful it could redefine a person's entire future. And Totilio prepared for it with unmatched dedication, pouring her soul into every essay, articulating a vision of sustainable agriculture that could uplift Nigerian farmers and protect fragile ecosystems, carefully assembling recommendations from professors who genuinely believed in her brilliance, and reviewing her application countless times until it reflected not just her achievements but her purpose. During this period, she shared her dreams with her cousin, yet a woman she had grown up with like a sister, unaware that beneath their shared history lay a silent comparison and a deepening resentment. Because while Totilio's life had been shaped by discipline and focus, Yetun's path had been marked by academic struggle, repeated failures, and unfulfilled ambitions, differences that quietly widened the emotional distance between them. Even as Totilio remained unaware of the storm gathering behind her smile, when she finally submitted her fellowship application, Totilio felt something she had rarely felt before: hope mixed with certainty. A calm belief that this opportunity aligned perfectly with the life she had worked so hard to build. And as she waited for the outcome, she trusted that effort, honesty, and perseverance would once again open the right door, not knowing that her greatest challenge would not come from rejection, but from betrayal by the very person she trusted most. 3 months after submitting her Bodija International Fellowship application, Totilio was living in quiet anticipation, checking her email each morning with a mixture of hope and patience, trusting the process and believing that whatever the outcome, she had given her best. When suddenly the news that reached her did not come from the fellowship committee, but from her cousin Yeton, whose voice on the phone carried an excitement so sharp it immediately unsettled Titilio's spirit, because Yeton announced, almost laughing, that she had been selected for the prestigious fellowship, a statement so absurd that Titilio initially thought it was a joke. Yet, as the seconds passed, and Yeton continued, speaking with confidence, confusion turned into disbelief, and disbelief into dread. Titilio reminded her gently that she was the one who had applied, that the fellowship was based on strict academic records and verifiable achievements. But Yeton's response was chillingly casual, revealing that she had copied Titilio's entire application, accessed her email, duplicated every essay, recommendation letter, and research portfolio, and submitted them under her own name while forging academic details that did not belong to her, explaining without shame that the fellowship committee had accepted the documents believing Yeton to be the brilliant environmental scientist they described, because, on paper, she was perfect, flawless, and indistinguishable from Titilio. As the truth unfolded, Titilio felt her body grow cold, her breath shallow, and her heart crack under the weight of betrayal, because this was not theft by a stranger, but by someone who had slept in the same room as her, shared childhood secrets, and watched her struggle and succeed step by step. And when Titilio pleaded with Yeton to withdraw the application and confess the truth, Yeton's tone hardened into cruelty, claiming she deserved the opportunity just as much, that life had always favored Titilio, that intelligence and success had come too easily for her, while Yeton had suffered quietly in comparison. And now it was her turn to take what she believed the world owed her. The call ended abruptly, leaving Titilio sitting alone in her room, staring at the walls as the magnitude of what had happened settled into her bones, because her future 2 years of funded study, global recognition, and a career-defining opportunity had been stolen in a single act of calculated deception. And worse still, she had no immediate proof, no official rejection letter to contest, no authority willing to listen. Only the echo of Yeton's words, reminding her that systems often believed paperwork over truth. When Titilio contacted the fellowship office in the United States, her voice shaking as she explained the situation, she was met with polite indifference and procedural finality, told that the selected candidate had already been verified and that any correction would have to come from Yeton herself, a condition that sealed her despair, because Yeton had made it clear she would never admit the crime. And as days passed, the reality of loss began to consume Titilio's spirit, her confidence eroding as she replayed the betrayal again and again, questioning not only her trust in others, but her belief that honesty was enough in a world where deceit could so easily triumph. When families became involved, the damage deepened, as Yeton's parents denied everything, accusing Titilio of jealousy and bitterness, fracturing relationships that had once been bound by blood and tradition. And when Yeton finally traveled to the United States to begin the fellowship, using Titilio's stolen identity to access laboratories, conferences, and opportunities that rightfully belonged to someone else, Titilio remained in Ibadan, watching her dream drift further away with each passing day, feeling powerless, silenced, and abandoned by a system she had trusted, unaware that this devastating betrayal was only the beginning of a much larger battle that would test her resilience, redefine her strength, and ultimately determine whether truth could still survive in the shadow of lies. After Yeton departed for the United States, leaving behind shattered trust and a divided family, Titilio's world collapsed into a heavy, colorless routine, where days blended into nights and hope felt like a distant memory she could no longer touch, because every reminder of the Bodhija Fellowship, every email notification, every academic article, every mention of environmental research felt like a wound being reopened, and for weeks she barely left her room, her mind replaying the betrayal endlessly as she questioned how hard work, honesty, and excellence could be so easily erased by deception. Though her parents stood beside her, their support was tangled in fear of public shame and family scandal, preventing them from taking immediate legal action, and this silence only deepened Titilio's sense of isolation, as if the truth itself had been buried to protect appearances, while Yeton flourished abroad under a stolen identity, gaining access to laboratories, conferences, and global platforms meant for someone else. During this fragile period, Titilio's confidence eroded, her once sharp ambition dulled by exhaustion and grief, until even the thought of applying for another opportunity felt pointless, because what was the use of effort if someone else could simply take the reward? And it was in this emotional darkness that her university friend Olamide arrived unexpectedly at her family home, bringing with her not sympathy alone, but anger sharpened by purpose. Because as a journalism student trained to question power and expose lies, Olamide recognized the situation not as misfortune, but as a crime, and she refused to accept that truth could be silenced so easily. While Titilio doubted that anything could be done, Olamide began her investigation methodically, contacting the University of Ibadan to obtain official academic records, comparing transcripts, thesis titles, and graduation honors, uncovering clear discrepancies between Titilio's documented excellence and Yeton's far weaker academic history, evidence that immediately suggested fraud. And when she reached out to professors whose recommendation letters had allegedly supported Yeton's application, each confirmed they had written only for Titilio, some even expressing disbelief that Yeton's name had been associated with such credentials. Piece by piece, Olamide assembled a trail of undeniable proof, tracing suspicious email access logs that showed Titilio's account had been entered from unfamiliar locations, connecting those timestamps to internet records linked to the hotel where Yeton worked, revealing not coincidence but deliberate intrusion. And as the evidence grew, so did Olamide's determination. Because she understood that truth alone was not enough, it needed a platform and the courage to confront powerful institutions. Armed with documentation, testimonies, and digital records, she contacted the Bodhija International Fellowship Organization directly, identifying herself as a journalist investigating a case of identity theft and academic fraud. And her professionalism forced the institution to listen, prompting an internal investigation that quickly confirmed the deception they had unknowingly endorsed. Within weeks, the fellowship committee reached a conclusion that shifted the balance of power entirely, acknowledging that Yeton's application had been fraudulent from start to finish, built on stolen credentials and forged documents. And for the first time since the betrayal, Titilio felt something stir within her, a cautious return of belief that truth, when pursued relentlessly, could still break through silence, and that justice, though delayed, had not abandoned her after all. The email that arrived from the Bodija International Fellowship carried a weight that Titilio could feel even before she opened it, because deep inside she sensed that the weeks of investigation, sleepless nights, and quiet resilience had finally reached a turning point. And as she read the formal language confirming that Yetand had been found guilty of identity theft, document forgery, and academic fraud, a wave of emotions crashed over her: relief, validation, grief, and a justice long delayed, because the institution acknowledged not only the crime but its failure to detect it earlier, explaining that Yetand's fellowship had been revoked immediately, and that the matter had been referred to law enforcement authorities in the United States for prosecution, while Yetand, thousands of miles away, received the same message as a sentence rather than a notification. Titilio remained in Ibadan, sitting quietly as the truth finally stepped into the light, realizing that the future she believed was stolen had not been destroyed but merely delayed. And when the fellowship committee followed up with an official apology, offering her the position that rightfully belonged to her, Titilio struggled to breathe as joy mixed with disbelief, because for months she had existed in survival mode, unable to imagine restoration, yet here it was unfolding in real time. Meanwhile, Olamide's investigative article exploded across Nigerian media, its headline exposing betrayal and identity theft within an elite international program. And as the story went viral, public outrage grew, not fueled by gossip, but by documented evidence, turning Titilio into a symbol of resilience rather than victimhood. And although the sudden attention overwhelmed her, she remained focused on justice rather than fame, refusing interviews that sensationalized her pain and choosing instead to let the facts speak. In the United States, Yetand's downfall was swift and unforgiving, as legal proceedings advanced with evidence too strong to contest, leaving her stripped of credibility, reputation, and freedom, a stark contrast to the confidence with which she had once dismissed Titilio's pleas. And as Titilio prepared for her journey to begin the fellowship at last, she understood that restoration did not erase suffering but transformed it into strength, and that truth, when defended with courage and patience, carried a power greater than deception ever could. The day she received her official acceptance packet under her own name, bearing her real credentials and achievements, Titilio held the documents in her hands and wept not for what she had lost, but for what she had reclaimed, realizing that justice had not only returned her opportunity, but restored her belief in herself, her work, and the idea that integrity still mattered in a world tempted by shortcuts. And as she packed her bags for the United States, she did so not as a broken woman chasing a dream, but as a survivor stepping into a future sharpened by truth and earned by resilience. As Titilio prepared to leave Nigeria for the United States to finally begin the fellowship that bore her name and honored her work, she believed the nightmare had ended. Yet life revealed that justice sometimes arrives in layers, unfolding deeper meaning after the initial victory. Because it was during this fragile moment of transition that a lawyer named Shagan sought her out, a man who had followed her story through Lumide's investigative reporting and recognized not only the crime committed against her, but the unseen costs it had imposed: lost time, emotional trauma, and opportunities stolen during months of despair. Shagan explained calmly that while criminal justice had punished Yetand for fraud and identity theft, civil justice offered a different path, one that acknowledged personal harm. And though Titilio hesitated, exhausted by conflict and eager to move forward, she eventually understood that seeking compensation was not revenge but accountability, a declaration that her suffering had value and that wrongdoing carried consequences beyond imprisonment. With Shagan's guidance, she filed a civil lawsuit against Yet, detailing the psychological distress, professional delays, and reputational damage caused by the betrayal. And when the case reached court, the evidence was overwhelming, because the same documents that exposed the fraud internationally now painted an undeniable picture of intentional harm, leaving Yetand with no defense beyond regret. And as the judge ruled in Titilio's favor, ordering substantial financial damages, something shifted inside her. A release she had not realized she needed, because the verdict affirmed that her pain was real, her loss measurable, and her dignity worthy of protection under the law. Yetand, having served her prison sentence in the United States, returned to Nigeria burdened not only by legal penalties but by social exile, struggling to rebuild a life shadowed by the consequences of jealousy and deception. While Titilio, by contrast, stepped into her fellowship with renewed clarity, conducting groundbreaking research on sustainable farming across West Africa, publishing influential papers, and earning recognition as a leading voice in environmental conservation. Achievements that proved her excellence had never depended on stolen opportunity, but on her own relentless discipline. During these years, her relationship with Shagan deepened quietly, built not on rescue but mutual respect, patience, and shared values. And when he finally confessed his love, Titilio faced the vulnerability of choosing companionship after betrayal, understanding that trust once broken did not easily rebuild, yet recognizing that healing sometimes required opening one's heart again. And though she made no promises beyond honesty, she allowed love to grow at its own pace, discovering that strength and tenderness could coexist. And by the time she completed her fellowship and returned to Nigeria, transformed not just by education but by experience, she understood that justice had given her more than restitution. It had given her the freedom to define her future without fear, without silence, and without the weight of stolen dreams. When Titilio returned to Nigeria after 2 transformative years in the United States, she was no longer the woman whose future had once been stolen in silence, but a confident environmental scientist whose work now shaped conversations across West Africa. Having published groundbreaking research on sustainable farming, advised international organizations, and proven beyond doubt that her brilliance did not depend on opportunity alone, but on perseverance sharpened by adversity. And as she stepped back into Ibadan, she was welcomed not just by family and friends, but by a nation that had followed her journey from betrayal to justice. A journey that reached a deeply personal turning point when Shagan met her at the airport, his patience rewarded by time and truth. And later that evening, beneath a quiet sky overlooking the city that had raised her, he knelt and asked her to share a future with him, a moment that symbolized not rescue but partnership, And when Totilio said yes, she did so with a heart healed enough to believe again. Their wedding became a celebration, not only of love, but of restoration, attended by friends, mentors, journalists, and educators who had witnessed her resilience, while Yetand remained absent, still trapped in the consequences of her own choices, struggling to rebuild a life burdened by regret, a living reminder that shortcuts steal more than they give. Yet Totilio chose not to dwell on bitterness, because her focus had shifted toward purpose. And soon after her marriage, she founded the Totilio Environmental Research Institute, an organization dedicated to conservation, ethical research, and the empowerment of young scholars from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that talent, not privilege or deception, determined opportunity. And alongside this work, she launched an initiative called Reclaim Your Truth, providing legal and journalistic support to victims of fraud, identity theft, and betrayal, transforming her pain into a pathway for others seeking justice. 5 years later, when she stood before students at the University of Ibadan as a guest speaker, the same institution where her journey had begun, she spoke not as a victim, but as a witness to truth's endurance, telling them that betrayal may steal time, but never identity, that injustice may delay destiny, but cannot destroy it unless one surrenders, and that courage lies not only in dreaming, but in defending what is rightfully yours. And as applause filled the hall, Totilio saw in their faces the same hunger she once carried, now fueled by understanding rather than illusion. And she realized that her greatest achievement was not the fellowship, the recognition, or the publications, but the life she had reclaimed with integrity intact, knowing that while others may attempt to steal success, only those who fight for truth earn a future worth living. And so her story became more than an African tale of betrayal. It became a testament to justice, resilience, and the unbreakable power of owning one's truth.